The sex offender witch hunt. When people are asked, what is a witch hunt? Many will answer that it was something in the 1600s and that witches were burned at the stake. Basically, that is correct. That was one actual witch hunt. It lasted for about 40 years and finally dissipated because society finally came to their senses and realized their rational thinking that the people they were murdering were probably innocent and, of course, were. There were no actual witches, and no one was being harmed. It probably started with someone's paranoia, suspicion, overactive imagination, rumors, and then spread until it turned into a mass hysteria. Of course, in those days with no mass media, it may have took a while, but maybe not. Rumors and fear spread quickly. The main fear that soon overwhelmed the people was not actually about the witches. Most people didn't really care and probably didn't really believe it. But as finger pointing, the scapegoating, and accusations increased, people soon became very afraid of being accused themselves. No one wanted to be decapitated on the guillotine, burned alive on a stake, drowned, stoned to death, etc., especially for something they didn't do. But then some may have been afraid of being discovered for something they did do. The only recourse was to become suspicious of everyone, even your own relatives or friends, and to avoid anyone who people suspected were a witch, definitely not to help them in any way, or to stand up for their possible innocence. Next thing you knew, you were being accused too, so you jumped on the bandwagon, played follow the leader, even though you knew it was probably wrong and you may have really known very little about the actual issues. You may have been ignorant to the truth and facts. You may have just wanted revenge from something in your past. You may have just wanted to belong to something to feel important. You may have even been hiding some secrets yourself and afraid others might find out. You may have had a low self-esteem for different reasons and needed to point fingers or blame someone. So you needed a scapegoat, and the witches were the ones that everyone was using. Some may have actually thought they were doing the right thing, that they were helping people in some way, but mostly it was simply hate, prejudice, the desire to judge and find faults in others to make ourselves feel more perfect, and the fear of getting involved. The irrational persecution continued to escalate to inhumane and unimaginable extremes, resulting in the deaths of many innocent men, women, and children. Many lives and reputations were ruined, many who had to suffer the guilt of this onslaught against their own human beings. Well, the truth is that witch hunts have been around since the beginning and into the present. Our caveman ancestors probably carried on witch hunts against other tribes. During the persecution of the Christians, Jesus Christ became a scapegoat, an innocent man who ended up tortured and murdered. Witch hunts have attacked race, religion, culture, beliefs, gender, sexual orientation, and more. Even religions have conducted witch hunts, forcing changes in cultural and religious beliefs and ways, even leading to near genocide. Witch hunts against our own Native Americans by our European ancestors. Fear and greed. Fear of anything and anyone that is different from us, but we are all different. Though many witch hunts arise out of ignorant fears, judgment, hate, prejudice, rumor, false information, etc., they can also start with an actual problem, the need to make actual changes, but may still not be based on actual truth and fact, or clear judgment. If we suddenly believed that the compulsive carrot eaters were eating up all the carrots, and our carrot supplies seemed to back that up, our desire to conserve our carrots and to control the people we assumed were causing the problem could become a major issue, especially for those who really liked carrots. If not kept within rational limits, this issue could get out of control, causing a mass carrot hysteria. And suddenly a witch hunt develops, imposing extreme consequences on the compulsive carrot eaters, and even murders result. Further research may even reveal that they were not even at fault, that the carrot supplies were dwindling because of damaged crops that year. And then there are attacks on sex itself. The Christian Bible tells us that in the beginning God created man and woman naked, and they were in the Garden of Eden, naked as they should be, and it was good. Suddenly, Satan comes along, talks Eve into eating an apple. She talks Adam into it, and suddenly they realize they're naked and cover up because now it's bad. This is one of the first stories that young children learn in Sunday school. Our bodies and our nudity are bad, and we should hide it, especially our genital areas. This, of course, was one of Satan's lies, but we are still believing it today. Around the same time of the Salem, U.S. witch hunts, were the pigman hunts of New England, also in the U.S. Boys and men who were suspected of having sex with barnyard animals and had a pact with the devil. Sex with animals was and still is somewhat common. It so happens that the age of consent at that time was 10 years old, and remained so until the late 1800s. Religion led the decision to raise that age, as well as a concern of prostitution, though there were never any cases to back up that concern. Anyway, the pigmen were also hunted down and killed along with the animals. This witch hunt also dissipated, as they all do. As late as the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 1960s, homosexuals were given electroshock therapy as an attempt to cure them. Of course, it didn't work. Women who were discovered masturbating were coerced into having clitoridectomies done, which is the surgical removal of the clitoris. Some countries still perform this genital mutilation today. If you were a boy discovered masturbating, you could be forced to have a circumcision, the surgical removal of the foreskin, without any anesthetic, or your foreskin stitched up with wire. This is only a few of the insane and cruel sexual suppressive experiments that took place even in the United States not so long ago. Shocking? I hope so. It would appear as these experiments were quite secretive, as most people don't know about them unless you research it. But back then, the word and the fear probably spread quickly, and I would imagine women especially became quite afraid and secretive about sexual or nudity issues, and probably taught their children the same to protect them. This taught and learned fear and avoidance of normal and healthy sexuality and nudity, reinforcing the Adam and Eve fear, could well have led to many irrational thoughts and feelings and possibly even deviant or illegal behaviors. Many negative issues and problems can arise out of a lack of proper sex education, harmful perceptions or interpretations of sexuality and nudity, and as some well-known sexologists believe, the hindering or altering of normal and healthy sexual growth and development that should be acquired starting from childhood on up. Changes were seen by the sex, drugs, and rock and roll revolution era of the 1970s. Sexual attitudes were loosening up, nudism and reacceptance of our normal and healthy nude bodies was becoming very popular. Pornography was increasing, and even books, magazines, and films depicting nudity and sexuality of minors were being sold legally in adult bookstores and through mail order around the world. Homosexuality was now accepted as a sexual orientation, and the suppressive experiments stopped. Women's liberation movements were making a lot of progress. Around the mid-70s, a violent rape and a murder of a young boy, rare as it is today, sparked fear and anger in the communities and also placed sex materials involving minors in question as a possible factor. Shortly after, these materials were banned and pulled from all the bookstores and prohibited from being sold through mail order or from entering the U.S. from other countries. Some countries followed suit in the years to follow. This seems to be where the problem began. The news media latches on to the story and doesn't let go. It remains top news across the country for a long time. Emphasis on minor sexual materials increases, as well as the hunt for the killer. Warnings about the situation repeating and the need to protect our children more becomes a major concern. Due to media hype and exaggerating issues out of proportion as they quite frequently do, fear is instilled in the public and eventually turns into a mass hysteria. The words predator, molester, and pedophile become household words. The public begins to believe that there is going to be a sudden onslaught of dangerous, violent sexual predators seeking to kidnap, rape, and murder our children. At this point, children are probably being excessively warned and scared about stranger danger and probably start to fear almost anyone, and unnecessary fear around their bodies and sexuality may also occur. The media now begins to report any and all types of molest or rape cases, the same that were happening before, but no one was really focusing on them as major issue or news. The media began to focus on any type of sexually related incidents at all, including what is now referred to as child pornography. With the creation of the internet, child pornography was now being viewed, again, traded, sold, distributed, etc. online worldwide. The actual truth and facts start to become distorted. And as rumors, myths, and assumptions start to increase, the gossip begins to form groups around the country. Some are feminist or religious groups, some are individuals or groups that simply want to jump on the bandwagon and become a part of this new hysteria, but often being totally ignorant to the actual issues and the truth and facts surrounding them. Some may start to fear accusations or suspicion of themselves or their own children, possibly having engaged in some similar behavior in their own past, or their children having engaged in, as most children do, some sort of normal sexual experimentation or play that could now be wrongly judged as a deviant sexual act. Some may see a chance for revenge for some misfortune in their past. Some may just need someone to judge or to see as less worthy because they don't feel good about themselves and need to feel that they are better than others. And there are those who actually believe that they are helping a situation and doing the right thing, but don't realize yet the negative consequences and results. And then there are certain groups or individuals who may see an opportunity to further their own cause or promote their beliefs, such as politicians seeking approval and votes, religious persons promoting their beliefs, extreme feminists desiring to place unfair judgment on men, persons seeking fame or fortune, the news media looking for a story, and so on. Many who are seeking a scapegoat to get the focus off themselves or a situation for whatever reason, or to blame for something else, etc., are now using the sexual predator as an outlet. The public now becomes more afraid, not just of the predator hysteria, but maybe even more so of being accused or suspected themselves, or even their own children. They see the persecution and ridicule and don't want any part of it. Often they will make a point of it to make sure you know they are not one of them. To protect themselves and their children, many start to join in on the hysteria, talking and warning about predators or molesters, maybe even pointing fingers at those they suspect, or condemning those who are known. Most would not dare to associate with one, help one in any way, stand up for one, or to question their persecution. To do so would bring suspicion upon themselves. Those who do want to speak out against the chaos are afraid to stick their neck out for fear of the guillotine. Many avoid those who might be, one, based on assumption or stereotyping, such as the way they look or act. The media again seems to jump on this new suspicion. Finger-pointing society. And a flourish of cop and manhunt shows appear, like John Walsh's America's Most Wanted, which only exacerbates the situation. Sexual offense treatment is created, and the common phrase sex offender is born. The focus becomes placed on changing and controlling sexual disorders through mental health counseling, with national and international studies taking place. The plethysmograph, an electronic device that is attached to the genitals of men and women and measures sexual arousal, was originally invented and used to keep homosexuals out of the military. It is now used on sex offenders while they are shown pictures and videos of adult and child nudity and sex, even child pornography. They are forced to listen to audio tapes of adult and child rape stories. The same things they are told to avoid and are serving long sentences for. Courts eventually ruled that the device has no proven scientific value, is mentally and physically invasive, and are not accurate. The test could potentially lead to a relapse or reoffense, yet they are still in use. Even sex offender therapists and research agencies begin to question some of their methods and beliefs. Treatment is in experimental stages and still is, and sometimes inaccurate information about offenders is presumed to be correct, even in the courts, and found later to be incorrect. A full-blown witch hunt is now occurring. Hate groups and other ignorant persons wanting to make a name for themselves begin vigilante attacks on offenders and their innocent families. Hate messages posted in yards, threats, harassment, assaults, houses set on fire, and even murders. One offender is murdered and his killer receives no punishment, the judge saying he was in the right. One judge rules that a person has the right to be a pedophile, but they just can't practice it. False accusations fly. Daycare and church sex offense hysteria set in. Reports of possible victims are automatically believed, and possible offenders are automatically believed to be guilty. Many men are convicted of sexual offenses they never committed. Some die in prison only to find later on through DNA that they were innocent. Sex becomes used as a weapon to get back at a spouse, a boss, or anyone whom revenge is desired. After all, sex is the ultimate weapon due to its private and sensitive nature. Offenders begin to lose their jobs, their residences, etc., as no one wants to be involved or responsible. They are shunned and banished from their communities, their churches, even their own families. Sex offenders are not being burned at the stake, but certain ignorant persons try to impose other extreme consequences, such as one-strike laws, wearing clothing printed with sex offender, having X's placed on their foreheads, castration, capital punishment, etc. Offenders' pictures and information are posted publicly on TV news and newspapers, humiliating innocent families and children. Families are separated, children taken away from their parents for no valid reasons. Regardless of an offender's actual case, offense, etc., they are all labeled as sex offenders. And society begins to believe they are all the same, all dangerous, violent predators who are seeking to kidnap, rape, and murder children. And this thinking still exists today. Consequences become extreme anyway, and unfair and unjust sentencing, conditions, restrictions, etc. are imposed regardless of actual offenses. Judges feel compelled to hand out the worst possible sentences. Juries are biased and tend to make unfair and inaccurate decisions. Prosecuting attorneys lie and distort the truth and facts even in the courts, wanting to prove their case, and offenders' documents are full of errors. Polygraph tests are inaccurate and used against sex offenders in court, even though it is illegal. Correction and probation officers distort the truth and facts. Even attorneys are afraid to take on these cases, and even afraid to properly defend their clients. No one wants to be judged or ridiculed by the public when their self-image and reputation is at stake. Some offenders are civilly committed for life, only based on what they might do. In prisons, sex offenders are considered the lowest and worst group and are subjected to humiliation, harassment, threats, extortion, assaults, rape, and even murder, in addition to their already extreme hardships of prison life. Trying to resituate in the communities after they serve their sentence, they find that rules, conditions, and restrictions are so numerous and extreme that it is almost impossible not to violate supervision, probation, or treatment. And many do, only to return to prison. Many are forced to wear GPS bands on their arms or legs, tracked and controlled like wild animals, causing more humiliation and stress. They are forced to take polygraphs, which is technically illegal. Forced to take treatment, which can be beneficial, but often very extreme, overwhelming, and confusing for many. Even if you can't pay for it or don't understand it, you can go back to prison. They're met with employment residence rejection. They can serve an addition of even lifetime supervision and registration, which causes even more problems for them and their families. They are still kept apart from their families and children, often for no valid reason. It never ends. Public registration becomes a law in 1990, and after a child rape murder, is imposed on all sex offenders, regardless of their offense, only increasing the risks of harm for them and their innocent families and the difficulties they face with employment and residence. Again, most people really aren't afraid of what a sex offender might do, but they are often afraid to rent to them or to employ them because it's all too easy for anyone to find out who and where they are through their registration. And then the employer or the manager owner can face the same ridicule and anger from others because of the stigma that is attached to the sex offender label, and because they catered to one of them, not necessarily due to actual fear of the offender. This is the same stigma and fear that recently caused a 16-year-old boy who only texted a nude picture of himself to his 16-year-old consensual girlfriend to commit suicide, to jump off a 6-story building and kill himself. He was threatened with the sex offender label and registration, a horrible tragedy that could have been avoided. What was intended to help and protect our children appears now to be destroying them. What was intended to have a positive outcome has ended up with negative results. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Yes, at some point we need to make some changes, but we obviously went about it in the wrong ways. And then it escalated, got out of control, started to have the opposite effect of what was originally intended, and then turned into something it was never intended to be. Instead of helping people, it has harmed many, many more. Sex offenders are targeted, and no other criminal group is faced with the same enormous legal consequences, even though there are many groups that are equally and more dangerous to society than most sex offenders, like murderers. We have programmed ourselves to be so focused on the sex offender. We forget that we are surrounded by a lot more people and many more important issues to worry about. And the witch hunt continues to only get worse and worse, not better, with more and more extreme and unfair laws being imposed on them every year. The news media continues to fuel this fire and to keep the hype and the witch hunt going. The Walsh Act of 2006, SORNA and SMART, also created by John Walsh of America's Most Wanted, only made things more chaotic for sex offenders and their families, increasing registration requirements and imposing more restrictions and increasing the monitoring of offenders as if it weren't enough stringent already. And let us consider that all these measures are creating mass stress, problems, pressure, low self-esteem and poor self-image, fear, humiliation, anger, poor living conditions, social problems, physical and mental health issues, frustration, and more, which has led to suicide of offenders and more than likely has and will continue to lead to relapse and re-offense. We are creating this. Sometimes we do things backwards. We do the wrong thing when we think we are doing the right thing, and even create our own problems. Prison helps no one. It makes people worse. Treatment and help does work. We can now see and understand how a witch hunt can develop and how it has developed against those labeled as sex offenders. And the only way to stop a witch hunt is to put an end to the public hysteria, to the rumors, the myths and lies, the fear, the anger, the irrational judgment, etc., And the only way to do that is to educate society with the truth and facts and with knowledge on a mass level. And this is where we come in. We all can help each other, our communities, and our nation with understanding the severely misunderstood issue and with changing our irrational thinking and actions. Now let us consider some other valid concerns. Anytime a witch hunt or a suppressive attack on sex occurs, fear and avoidance follows, as well as numerous other negative consequences. This stands to reason. If you were around in the 50s during those barbaric experiments to control homosexuality and masturbation, out of fear you would avoid it and teach your children the same to protect them and yourself. If you were a Christian during the persecution era, you would probably want to hide the fact that you were a Christian. If you were around during the Salem witch hunts in the 1600s, you would certainly avoid any type of activity that could appear suspicious and be misconstrued as witch practices. This fear and avoidance could become somewhat of a national epidemic. It could certainly change the ways you thought about certain subjects. In other words, the normal and healthy act of masturbation now becomes bad, taboo, secretive, disgusting, fearful, etc. Now, maybe the whole subject of sex in general and anything related to it, such as nudity, becomes the same in your mind. This thinking, of course, is unhealthy and destructive. You start feeling guilty and ashamed of it. Maybe you start seeking other sexual outlets to satisfy your needs, maybe even deviant or illegal. Somehow you started out normal and now you have all sorts of sexual problems and maybe social problems as a result. You have just gone from healthy sex to illegal sex due to irrational sexual opinions and beliefs that were probably started by some fanatic somewhere and somehow spread and became cultural practices. Thank God people eventually come to their senses with these issues. If you are a child, it's worse. You are hearing and learning all these things from your parents, from peers, your friends, the media, sex ed teachers, etc. At your age, many messages can even be misunderstood or confused. These same warnings and secrecy about normal and healthy sex and nudity begin to relay messages that it's bad, it's disgusting, should be avoided, etc. Fear, guilt, shame, embarrassment, confusion, etc. start to set in. You don't know it yet, but your normal and healthy sexual growth and development patterns are being altered and hindered. Your unhealthy thoughts and feelings toward nudity and sex carry into your puberty and adolescent years and cause problems and difficulties in your social relationships and possibly your sexual encounters. We all know it happens, regardless of the age of consent. This is why they hand out condoms in junior high schools. Because of irrational beliefs you were taught and learned, you find your feelings towards sex and nudity is that it is still bad, disgusting, shameful, etc., and find yourself avoiding it and withdrawing from opportunities that your mind is also telling you that you want. Your thinking carries on into your adult years. Confusion and sexual frustration set in. You fail in adult relationships because of problems with sex and withdrawing from your partners. You begin to seek out other sexual outlets to meet your needs, maybe even deviant or even illegal. Maybe you look at child pornography or even offend against a child. Maybe you find yourself in prison because of sex problems, and you wonder how you got there. This is actually a true case scenario. The concern is this: are we repeating history and once again creating our own problems? In the last few decades, the attacks and war on sex, the sex offender and the sex offender witch hunt, the excessive focus on rape and other sex issues, and increase of irrational sex laws has caused more harm than good. It has only created fear and avoidance and most likely multitudes of other sex and social problems in our society. Just the opposite of what was probably intended. We, and especially our children, hearing and learning all this from all sources, could be severely affected in many negative ways. Fear of sex, unhealthy views toward nudity and sexuality. Sex is bad, our bodies are bad, fear it, avoid it. The stigma of the sex offender label alone is destroying us and our children, as well as irrational laws like registration. Many groups are responsible for this. Religious groups, extreme feminists, the media, John Walsh and others who create these irrational laws, and agencies who make up ideas on how to control and monitor sex offenders based on their opinions. Let's look at the facts. In the last few decades, we see a decline in social interaction, especially among children, decline in marriages and births. And then we see increases in other sexual outlets, increases in homosexuality and other outlets, increase in sexual deviancy, increases in sexual violence, especially against children, increases in illegal pornography involving children, increase in prostitution and adult entertainment, increase in sex trafficking, kidnapping, murder, increase in divorce, child support, and abortion, increase in sexual and relationship problems, preaching abstinence in schools and churches, and inadequate sex education. Are we destroying many of our nation's important foundations and strongholds like marriage, family, children, happiness and contentment, social and sexual relations? As we know, banning child pornography did not stop it, and it probably never will. For whatever reasons, it is still in demand, so there will always be a supply. But it did manage to drive it underground on the black market, increasing monetary and sex crimes, increasing sex trafficking, kidnapping, and murder. Now it's legal. The perpetrator does not want to get caught, especially with such extreme consequences. All the extreme laws imposed on sex offenders has not stopped sex offenses and probably never will. But it did manage to cause mass problems for offenders and their innocent families and the rest of society. And now it's having the totally opposite effect of what was probably intended. The stigma alone causing our children to harm themselves, even commit suicide. We need to start over. It is time to stop this madness, to stop the witch hunt and the attacks on sex, to get the focus off the sex offender, review and revise a multitude of irrational laws, and to protect our children in the right ways that are also safe for them and safe for all of us. May God bless us all.